evidently there was some stuff going on. He was moved in like a catering vehicle or something. But why was he moved? What's the situation? Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
How much do you have to say about Count Binfig?
I have a little bit to say. That we're living in extraordinary times, that a robot got 27% of the vote in the election.
Yeah.
A little wind-up here. Nigel Farage is a guy who's in charge of Reform UK. He used to be in charge of UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, which had some clout because a lot of the British were Eurosceptical, so they would elect them to the European Parliament, not necessarily to the regular Parliament. But the British Parliament used to be dominated by the Tories and Labour, so the left and right parties. The Tories are not as right-wing as the Republican Party, say I. But Reform UK, more right-wing, has had a surge in recent years. Nigel Farage triggered a by-election probably in order to get a mandate from his constituency ahead of a ethics investigation. A key element here is that the UK doesn't have primary elections, so in their general election, if you get a plurality, you win the seat. So there was a potential that a joke candidate would beat Nigel Farage, the pretty much founder or popular guy, operative guy, within Reform UK, although it isn't one of the big two parties. Although I don't know how many seats in Parliament they have right now. Did I miss anything? What do you have to say?
Oh, I'm not going to be very nice for the other major parties in the UK. They're cowards for not putting forth a candidate in this by-election just because. That they all sat it out because they thought it was a farce. Who cares, right? This was the opportunity for them to get their viewpoints out and to be heard and to provide a countervailing narrative to whatever it is that he's doing, right? It's a little strange to see a democratic society have so many candidates sit one out when elections are, by definition, the opportunity for them to be heard in a meaningful way and to have the voters weigh in on their political arguments and positions. It allows them to test new arguments, new positions. It also would afford the opportunity to debate Farage, right? If you have enough candidates, then they could debate in the public airwaves or in the media or anywhere they could talk and yell at him, right? In the marketplace of ideas. So I'm not going to be very nice to the Tory, Labour, and Green Party and say that it was very cowardly of them to not put forth any candidate, because then there is no countervailing narrative. There is no opposition. The only serious opposition was a comedian who dresses up like a robot and says he's 5,900 years old and that he's an expert or whatever, just like a total joke candidate who just ran to run, right? Gets 27% of the vote. How crazy is that? Right, like I get it.
Pretty crazy.
Farage got 60 whatever percent of the vote, but it's why did they all just completely? I don't understand why they all completely abandoned the opportunity to have their voice heard. It seemed very cowardly, from my perspective, that they don't even believe in the strength of their own positions to field any candidate, even if the candidate was going to lose against the Reform candidate. Like the risk Farage was taking was that he might lose. So give him a run for his money. Make him work for it, right? Get candidates who, even if they lose, get their name out there, who become more visible, who get more attention, who suck up all the media spotlight, so that Farage doesn't get all the media spotlight, because that just strengthens Farage.
And just really quick, the math backs you up on that, because let's say there was about 60% of those who voted for Farage, and there was about a 45% turnout. That means that 27% of people voted for Farage. Only 27%. if it had been a real contest and only 27% had ended up voting for him in this contest and some smaller percentage voted for a joke candidate, if they had a non-joke candidate, just imagine what could have happened.
Here's my other problem, and it's just a basic politics problem for what happened here, is that even if they lose, they still get their message out, they still get their ideas out. They also, elections are a way to train candidates for the future on how to be candidates, how to be political candidates. It is the training ground so that they get the ability to learn how to be more capable and effective communicators. It
Yes.
sends a terrible message for all of those major parties that they said, we're just not going to play the game. But that's the game. Politics is the game. You vie for the seat and so that you can get your arguments out there in the arena. If there is no counter argument, that wins is Farage and Binface, whatever Binface was arguing for. And it's like, no, it's completely, I'll say it as many times as I can. It's completely cowardly. There's no courage there. It's just a complete, I'm trying to think of the word, a complete surrender. There you go. That somehow they don't believe in their own arguments enough to defend them publicly, right? Because every election is a test, right? It's a test of the people who are running for public office to say, these are my ideas. They should stand the test of time, right? That they stand the test of public scrutiny. How do you test those ideas with the public? You put them up for a vote, right? And the public says, I like it or I don't. Pretty straightforward, right? So that's my opinion on this whole thing, is that this only strengthens Farage's position. He's playing a game. They called it a farce. That makes the game even stronger for him because he says, it's not a farce. I'm giving the voters the opportunity to choose yet again for me. And they did, right? And they did with more of the vote. This is what really galls me, makes me sad about the situation, is that he got more of a share of the vote than the first time he ran in, I think it was 2024 for the seat. Perception is everything. That essentially sends the message that he's stronger than ever, that he's in a very strong, very vote-proof position for the next time around, and that the voters have spoken. But you're right. Most of the voters sat it out. They didn't even participate. And that's not great for democracy either. You want to get people invested in their government, in their public politics, because it affects them, right? It affects their lives. And anytime there's a no vote or no vote at all, that's essentially voters just acceding to whatever the current political moment is instead of actively participating in their own futures. I don't know. That's something I've noticed for some democracies, especially Western democracies, that if they don't have mandatory voting, that a lot of voters just sit it out. They don't even participate. And that level of disinvestment is how you get people like Farage or Trump, or you get a level of sort of apathy where they passively accept these just like politicians who aren't necessarily actually invested in like the future welfare and well-being of the voters, right? That there's some other game being played. You know, a vacuum creates an opportunity.
So the current parliament has, or had at the election, mostly Labour members. Labour had an absolute majority. I was mistaken. I thought that the two-party system there, it looks like the Liberal Democrats got a good proportion of what the Tories got, but Labour won a lot in 2024. Okay, cool. Looks like Reform UK isn't the force that I thought it was.
Yeah, not anymore. Not like during Brexit. But look, this same criticism can be levied at the US, that in a lot of elections, there just isn't a countervailing voice at all. There is no opposition candidate, and there should be, right? That if the Democrats actually want to win the presidency in major national elections, they need to get their ideas out there everywhere, all the time, in every possible election, because they need to present a countervailing narrative to whatever is being spoon fed to the voters, especially in the South and in other parts of the US, where they're just constantly being reinforced with this is the only way that we can do anything. And that's not true. There are other alternatives and options for how to govern and how to better put forth ideas for the government that will lead to better outcomes overall. But if you're absent from the conversation, then the only thing that's heard is whoever has the microphone, whoever has the megaphone, right? because they're the only ones speaking on the ballot. They're the only ones whose voice is being expressed. And it's a marketplace of ideas. People are picking and choosing which ideas sound best and are best. And you have to test them out and you have to get voters to actually think about what they're doing instead of just passively accepting the powers that govern their lives, right? Like change happens bit by bit, but it does happen. That's just my thought there, is that it was very disappointing what happened in the UK, especially for Labour, right? If Labour has the majority in the parliament, they should always have somebody on the eaves waiting to swoop in. There should always be some candidate who's ready to go, who's just ready to be like, these are our ideas. You should hear them out and vote for us. Don't just accept defeat, right? At an absolute minimum. Don't just accept that things have to be the way they are because they are the way they are. Change happens by being the change.
Bin face might have had a bin on his face, but the other parties have egg on their face.
There you go. That's the way. It's very disappointing how it happened, and also very surprising that Bin Face got as much of the vote as he did, right? That he somehow managed as a joke candidate to get so much of the vote.
If he's lived over 5,000 years and he's just now getting into politics, who knows how much longer he'll live?
Yeah.
Maybe his day will come in a few centuries.
The Trump moved to another plane in Turkey. So Trump was in Turkey, and evidently there was some stuff going on, and he was moved. He was moved in like a catering vehicle or something. Ironic. But why was he moved? What's the situation?
Okay, from what I read about it and heard about it, is that there was a threat that they thought was credible enough to the plane that he was riding that they wanted him out of that plane. That there was some kind of concern that Iranian proxies, what's alleged is that Iranian proxies in Turkey were going to fire a shoulder-fired rocket at Air Force One in transit, shoot it out of the sky, right? And even if there's a 1% chance of that happening, the Secret Service has a zero fail mission, which means that they try to keep the person alive that they're guarding at whatever cost they need to. And so, in response to the question of why was he moved, what was the situation was that they had some kind of intelligence given to them by someone. From what I've read and what I've heard in the interviews and reading the articles, it was either Israeli intelligence or Turkish intelligence were telling the Trump people, hey, there is the possibility that this bad thing is going to happen, that the plane is a target, and they thought it was sufficient enough of a threat that he was moved, right? Period. That the element of deception and disguise was assessed to be the safer option than going on the plane.
Okay, that makes sense to me. But if he was moved, why weren't others moved, and did it put them in danger?
Okay, so I gave this one a good think, and from what I can tell from, again, what was publicly reported, is the others weren't moved to maintain the deception, right? So if you want to establish a decoy or diversion or some kind of illusion, you have to make it seem like Trump went on the plane and that the plane left so that the other plane could then safely go somewhere else, right? Could leave in a different direction or leave at a different time. As to why weren't the others moved, I think it's a question of priorities that, at least from my lay observation, they just didn't seem all that concerned with the safety of the press or the staff on the plane. And did the action put them in danger? Yes, it did, right? If the plane was considered to be such a threat that the president had to be moved, then that threat still existed for everybody else on the plane because the plane was the target, right? The plane was the one ostensibly that was carrying the president. Here's what I don't understand about that situation. They had the power to create a diversion, not just for the president, but for literally everybody on the plane, except for maybe the pilots, right? The pilots would have been necessary to fly the plane out, but they could have done any number of other options, like some kind of malfunction kept the plane grounded. President moved to a different plane, flew away, and then the plane left at a later time, with just the pilots, and that they moved everybody else onto a different plane because, there's some kind of malfunction, got to put everybody else on a different plane. It seems like there were other options that could have kept these people safe than just having everybody go on a plane that they thought was going to get shot out of the sky. And in particular, I think for the press pool, they really, maybe they could have waited until Trump was like in transit or something in the other plane that he'd been successfully moved and was on the way and nobody knew, to then tell the press, hey, right, president's not on the plane anymore. You don't have to stay on the plane. You can leave, find a different way home. At least give them the option. But what happened here is they weren't told. And so they were blissfully unaware that, oh, by the way, they were all in mortal danger, even more than they normally are. And the only issue I could see there is that I guess technically everybody who gets on that plane understands that it is always a target, right? Because it's the plane, right? And the US is at war, and so it's the plane that's a target. And so there is an argument to be made. They know. It's just the fact that the danger was like a little bit more, right, than your just average background danger, that it was more danger and that the danger was more imminent, especially if it was of sufficient risk or fear that they actually did this thing where they created a diversion.
Would this have happened if Trump hadn't accepted the Qatari jet?
So arguably it would have still happened even if he hadn't accepted the Qatari jet, because it was the original Air Force One that he didn't fly on, right? But it wasn't even the Qatari jet, right? It was,
Okay, I misheard that then.
at least that's my understanding. I could be wrong about it. I'm pretty sure, because they threw a whole fit, right, when the reporters said that he switched from the Qatari jet to the regular Air Force One, and they subpoenaed all those reporters over that article because.
Okay, I must have just seen the article and not heard about the critical response. My bad.
And the whole point there is that the article and what they said was technically wrong, right? Because he didn't switch from the Qatari jet to regular Air Force One. He switched from the Qatari jet to some other plane, some much smaller plane with his hidden diversion tactic, right? So that the whole point there being that even Air Force One wasn't sufficiently, I don't know, defensive enough or something in their estimation that they had to engage in this whole diversion anyways. But what I was going to say about putting everyone in danger is, it seems, have you ever seen the movie Shrek?
Shrek? Yeah.
Yeah, where Lord Farquaad gives that statement, some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. It seems like it's one of those situations. If one is being cynical about the situation, is that there could have been much more effort put into safeguarding the lives of the people on the plane, right? All the staff and the press and everybody else, and that there just wasn't. That it was only focused on Trump. And the problem with that is that all the government employees have an expectation of a duty of care towards their work environment. Remember, most of these people are civilians, they're not military. And the press, especially, they're allowed to fly on Air Force One by permission of the president. But it's not like a ironclad commitment, right? They have agency, they can leave if they want. They weren't apprised of the situation sufficiently to be given an informed choice, right? If they haven't told, hey, there's this possible threat, stay if you want anyways, right? Some may have, but they weren't provided the autonomous choice to do that. They thought everything was hunky-dory, business as usual, and it wasn't, that there was an elevated threat of some kind to trigger this kind of response. That's what the argument is for why they were put into danger, is that most of the time, obviously, there is some risk, right? It's air travel. Planes malfunction, things happen, right? There's no way around that. How many stories have we seen of planes failing in some way, shape, or form in the sky? It happens. That's a risk. It's also a war, right? Turkey's right next to Iran. Iran has missiles and drones and a variety of tools at their disposal. And there's no question that the plane is a target, right? There's no question it is a target. Look, the way you know that the plane is a target is because the plane has extensive defensive capabilities that most planes don't, right? They have anti-missile measures and a bunch of other things that most planes just don't have. State-of-the-art technologies that exist just for that plane. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Air Force One.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, but they get into some of the stuff that's in the plane that's way, way different than most planes. So look, there is, in this particular circumstance, I am willing to give the administration a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that even if there was a risk of this nature, technically the safest place for the people in that moment may have been that plane in their estimation because of the defensive capabilities it has, and that moving all of them in any kind of public or visible way would put them all at risk, because the target would then move to whatever plane everybody else got moved to, right? That you could move the president secretly with maybe a small group of people. No one's the wiser. But if the whole plane deplaned and the eyes of the world are always on the president with cameras and photos and whatever, after he just did this highly visible meeting in Turkey, right? So obviously they're not the only journalists that report on the president. Like foreign media was there, also
Most definitely.
probably at the airport looking at the plane, right? That there is an argument to be made, and I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on this. They're not making it as well as they could forcefully in the public discourse on this, but maybe they should. There is an argument to be made that in that moment, their best option for actually accomplishing what they're trying to do, which was a diversion, was to have everybody stay on the plane, fly to its destination. Now, were there other options that they probably could have done? Absolutely. The one that I think would have been most effective would be that they say, oh, there's some kind of malfunction on the plane, and then they have people a handful of time leave the plane over a long period of time, and they have to find different ways home, right? Something like that, right? Where like nobody's on the plane except the pilots who have to fly to bring the plane to maintenance or something like that because of the malfunction. Oh, we got to find other ways home, and then everybody scatters in every other direction, right? Like they go wherever. That was, I think, an option. The diversion would still work, right? Because you would still not know that Trump was being ferreted away in a catering truck to some other plane that was leaving, right? Some supply plane or whatever it was, right? You wouldn't know. How would you know? Look, I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt on this particular one because the plane does have defensive capabilities. It's not like it's a completely unsafe plane, even if it is fired upon, right? Like it's very unique among the planes of the world.
Yes.
But again, look, it is morally, it's a gray area, right? Because, okay, I would understand if there was urgency, if it had to happen, then, if the threat was literally imminent, right? I get that, right? If they thought that somebody was going to attack the plane, like in the airport, like right then and there, I get it, right? Get the president out, get him out now, leave.
Yeah.
I get that. But if there was a time element to this, right? If they thought the attack was going to happen 2 hours, 3 hours in a day, and it was going to happen while they're in the air, that's all the time in the world to get literally everybody off the plane that didn't have to be. Literally everybody. It's not like the government has no money or has no power or has some kind of inability to get people off of one plane into another plane or many other planes or no plane at all. They could take buses or a train
Yes.
or a boat, right? It didn't have to happen the way that it did unless it had to happen the way that it did. And what's not clear to me, because obviously I'm an outside lay observer and we're learning about this a month after the fact, what's not clear, and they're not being super upfront about it, is whether that threat was so imminent that they had to act then and there. The end, right? If that's the case, I get it, right? Their job is to protect the president. I get it. I understand. But if it wasn't, if there wasn't that element of imminence, then yeah, it put virtually everybody on the plane in danger. And it's not clear that they had to, right? It seems as if they chose to do that. And the choosing to do that part is where it's very controversial, right? As in, yes, of course they're going to protect the president, but there's many ways to do that. You don't have to take the most extreme version of something. Using people as human shields, pretty much, as decoys to make your escape. That's all. That's all I'm saying. You can still lie and say there's people on the plane, and there's nobody on the plane, right? This is one of those things where I am a bit on the fence about it because I do want to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit, right? That the situation was complicated. They were in a foreign country. There is an argument to be made. The plane is still very capable and has good defensive capabilities, and that most of the time it's sufficient for travel for anywhere in the world.
Yes.
But I also
Cool.
understand. Yeah, sorry. I also understand the skepticism. Let's put it that way. I get why the reporters might be really annoyed because they didn't sign. They signed up to be in the press pool. They didn't sign up to be used as targets, unwittingly used.
No, I concur. Yeah, that sounds fine. Is there any fallout from this?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that seem to have happened. One was that the press secretary appears to have quit.
Is that a direct result?
It sure looks. Look, I don't know exactly if that's the reason, but it sure looks to me like the press secretary didn't like that this happened and is quitting, right? Because it's just the immediacy of the response, right? The news article comes out that this happened, and then it's announced that she's resigning. It's like, okay, it sure looks an awful lot like, but I can't that one. I can't prove that one's pure speculation. If I was
Could
in
be
that,
though.
yeah, if I was in that position, I'd be like, no, I'm not a human shield. Thanks, but no thanks. But then the
Right.
other thing that happened, and this was the real fallout, is that the White House Correspondents Association is asking for new security protocols with the White House so that this doesn't happen again, right? That they come up with some kind of thing, some kind of rule or some kind of protocol on the part of the administration that they're not putting all the press pool at risk in a circumstance like this. They get some kind of notice or they're part of the escape plan. They're
Hmm.
not just used as tools. Look, it's a complicated situation, right? These are high stakes situations always, like every day. No question, right? Everywhere they go, when they're in transit, when they're in foreign countries, no matter where they are, it's always a risk. No question. Generally, the idea is that they're all in it together, right? Like that if there is a threat, that they're going to try and evade the threat together, that you don't purposely jump into a volcano, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. You know the volcano's
Makes a
there,
lot of
of
sense.
um,
Hmm.
but you don't purposely, like if it's erupting, you don't go onto the lava while someone else runs away to avoid the lava, right? Like you don't go into the volcano. So that's the idea here. They know that they're at risk, but what they don't know is that they're being put into more risk in that
Yes.
circumstance. And so I think that's the fallout here is that if they want to keep having the press pool covering the president and reporting and putting out the administration's message in real time, all the time, every day, that there has to be a higher standard of care or a duty of care towards the press reporters more than just they're there. That there
Hmm.
has to be at least some effort made to, if they know that there's an imminent risk, to at least warn them so they can get out of the way in whatever direction they want to go. That's just not the
Yeah.
direction of into the danger zone, right?
And I'm not going to sing it.
Yeah, not that. Okay, like, that's the thing. And I guess if there's one other fallout from this, it's that the press is now much more skeptical and cynical. If you listen to the reporters talking about this, they're not happy with what happened from this administration, and that they're much more annoyed with this administration compared to past administrations. This is the issue. This isn't the first time that presidents have engaged in diversionary tactics when traveling places. So in Trump
Hmm.
1, he went to North Korea, and the press had to have an embargo before they could report that he was going to North Korea, right? They knew it. They knew he was going into a dangerous place, and they were just told, don't report on it till we're gone, till we're back. Clinton had to switch a plan at one point. There were press that went into Ukraine with Biden. Bush went to Iraq at one point to the front lines to visit the troops during the Iraq War. There's a whole long list of things that have happened where people were secretly going to places and the press knew about it and were informed of their choices at the time, right? This is going to happen. You can choose to stay or go. In this circumstance, that made it different and is angering the press is they were not informed, that the trust was broken, that there's this sort of honor system between the press pool and the president, that they will learn of things in advance or ahead of time with the express promise that they won't report on it until after the fact. Point that they're told they can report on it. In this circumstance, they weren't informed and they learned a month later that they were in mortal peril, right?
Hmm.
Without knowing that they were in mortal peril. That's the issue here. That the administration didn't disclose that this happened after the fact. It took some ferreting out by reporters to to figure it out, right? They did reporting, they investigated it, and they found somebody somewhere who told them about it. That this is what happened, and oh man, what a story, right? What an extraordinary, scary story in these tumultuous times, right? But that's not super great for feeling safe on the job or not having what feels like a hostile work environment, right? Because most people, when they go to their job, they're like, oh, I'm just going to go to my job, do it well, go home, right? This one, it's like they go to their job and then they find out that they signed up for something much different. That essentially, because look, think of war correspondents. They know when they're going into a war zone, they're in a war zone, right? There's bombs and
Yes.
there's guns, there's bullets and there's soldiers, and things can go awry really fast. They understand the risks and they do it anyways, right? They know the risks. In this circumstance, they suddenly became war correspondents briefly without knowing that they were being war correspondents. And so I really feel for the press in this one. They're doing a job that they think is well paid, highly visible, is one rung of the career ladder to bigger and better things. And for a very brief amount of time, they're also put into extreme danger. That kind of is traumatic in their own sad way, right? But also I think about the staff on that plane, right? You would think the government has a responsibility to make sure that the people working for the government are kept safe. Like all the,
Yes.
the assistants, all the lower level executive branch staff that work for the president, like the secretaries, if they had a translator, all those people, right? The people who work for the various cabinet officials who are there, all the
Yeah.
cabinet officials who were on the plane, who it's not clear how many of them actually knew what was going on, right? Look, it's one thing if you know what the risks are ahead of time and you choose to accept those risks and go anyways. It's a whole different thing to be lied to your face in a job that you think is a serious job as a public servant, but you weren't aware that you volunteered for the military, that you suddenly signed up to be put into the front lines of a war zone. That's the thing here for the fallout, is that the White House Correspondents Association is advocating pretty fiercely, I would imagine, for much better security protocols. And I would hope, I don't know if this is happening, but I would hope that those government employees, all of them who they're just doing a job, right? They want to serve the American people, that they are also advocating for better working conditions, right? They at least had the opportunity, if given the knowledge of the threat they were about to face, to just leave, right? They're not slaves, right? They're not chained to their jobs. They're people with agency, right?
Had they known, they could have booked their own transportation
Sure.
home.
They take their own risks of their own accord on commercial planes or any other form of travel, right? Take a bus, take a train, take a boat, take a car, get a hotel and just go on a temporary vacation in Turkey. Who knows, right? But not that, right? Like people do jobs to get paid and go home. This was way, way worse than that. This was a level of extreme that most people do not experience in their daily work life. And workers are supposed to have rights, right? That people choose to do a job. They're not forced to do a job. And this was much closer to forced to do something than choosing to do something. And that's where the controversy is. And that's where the fallout is. That this is a different level of what the heck is going on kind of thing for the politics of the United States compared to past administrations. There's nothing quite like this that has happened that I can tell from looking at the public record that was this extreme, that put potentially hundreds of people's lives in mortal peril to maintain the ruse, right? There were other options. There had to have been other options that weren't this extreme. And so the question then becomes, why this one? Why did they settle on this choice? And I understand, and I think I explained some of the arguments for why that you had to maintain the illusion, but the problem is they could have maintained the illusion without actually putting people's lives in jeopardy, except for maybe the pilots, right? The military pilots who fly the planes. But here's the thing, those military pilots, or the ones at least with military piloting experience like fighter jet pilots, they signed up for that. They know the risks, right? They volunteered. And that there is a difference, a tangible difference between volunteering to go into combat and being forced into combat. And that's the fallout.
Right.
So anyway.
Born to be a reporter, forced to be a decoy.
All right.
It's a terrible look. It's a terrible story, right? You do a job because you think you're building towards a future, right? You do it to get paid and to have a career, not to face this level of stress and trauma and danger. That's just, yeah. Anyways, I really feel a lot of sympathy for the reporters who are not happy about what happened.
Reporters, like the scientists who work for the federal government, the heroes of America. Mondays with Mike.